Mental health challenges are often kept in the closet or even swept under the rug. We know they can affect anyone, from adults to children, and the struggle is real. Join us as we talk about relevant topics with mental health experts. Welcome to Equip Online, a place for hope and help.
Well, welcome to Equip Online. I'm Wally. This is my co-host, Brian. We're glad that you're here with us. And today we're going to be looking at the subject of OCD as it relates to our kids and how, as parents, that we can help them. And so we've brought in a guest expert, if you will, today that I'm going to let Brian introduce for us.
Thanks, Wally. So, we're joined by Joy Ryan today. So, Joy, we're really glad that you were able to make it and join us. And just to share a little bit about her, so Joy is an LPC, or licensed professional counselor, and a registered play therapist. She is the co-owner and professional counselor at Connect Psychological Services here in the Woodlands area. She holds a master's degree in counseling from Sam Houston State University. Is that the Bearcats?
They are the Bearcats.
The Bearcats, yes. Yeah, that's what I thought.
That's where my dad went.
I'm still not sure what a Bearcat is, but we'll save that for another time.
I'm not either.
All right. And then also an additional master's degree in Christian education from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, which is also where I went to school. So we don't even have a mascot. We need to... If you're watching this from Southwestern, let's get a mascot, please. And then you previously have experience working with and providing pastoral care for preteens and teens and youth ministry. And then also you've got counseling experience with school-age children, adolescents, and families. And then you've also received training in pediatric obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, through the International OCD Foundation. And so we're excited to really, there's a lot we could talk about with you, Joy, and maybe we'll have you come back at some point. But today we thought, why not just really talk about OCD? Because I feel like OCD is one of those areas where a lot of people know about it, a lot of people have heard about it, but there's still a lot of confusion. I think we make jokes about it. Oh, I must have OCD. And I think it'd be great just to, even as a parent, as we observe our kids, like, okay, is this normal behavior? Is this sort of something I should be concerned about? I mean, recently I've even had conversations with young parents as they look at their kids. And so, and I think as we'll get into, it can have a lot of variance in the levels of severity. Like it can be a really, really debilitating thing, or it has an impact in minor ways, but we can really learn about it. So. Hey, before we jump into that, so anything else you want to share about yourself, Joy, or?
Well, I love working in our practice, but I do it part-time because I have 3 kids. I have a 14-year-old, an almost 13-year-old, and a 10-year-old, and they keep me busy. Sports, and I'm a taxi when I'm not working.
There you go. So that's a good way to describe your job.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, that's awesome. Well, I love the fact that, you're not just a professional in learning this, but you're also a mom, and you're, you're trying to live this out in your own household, right? Yeah. Which can be challenging, like all of us. Well, awesome. Well, I'm excited to jump into our conversation. And Wally, you want to kick us off a little bit as we think about it?
We've thrown the term out there, Joy. What is OCD? What is it? What is it not? Can you help us with that?
Absolutely. So I think it's important to understand that OCD has 2 parts to it. There's the first part is the obsessions. The obsessions are the intrusive, unwanted. It could be unwanted thoughts. It could be an urge. Anything that causes distress, a great amount of distress. And we might have obsessions from time to time. Everybody does. But what the difference is there is that second piece, which is the compulsion piece. Compulsions, also called rituals, are the things that a person has to do in order to help ease that distress that they're feeling by the obsessions. And so it's a 2-part thing. That's what gives the person a diagnosis of OCD. Yeah.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. So really if you only have just the mental part, because sometimes maybe some of us are this way, or we know somebody that's maybe obsessive about organizing, every sock in their sock drawer a certain way, and their pantry has to be exactly right. we often were like, oh, you must be OCD, but it doesn't necessarily, that could just be their personality. It's the compulsion part of it.
Right.
That, and I think the word compulsion has a sense of, you feel like you have to do this in order to ease this somehow. Like you feel like you don't even have a choice. Like I have to do these behaviors.
And kids with OCD, people with OCD, they know logically that this doesn't make sense. They can tell you, it doesn't make sense what I'm doing, but I have to do it because that's the only way I feel better. And so, they know, hey, this is not how it's supposed to be, but I don't know. I've got to do it. I've got to do it because, whatever this thought is that's kind of driving it is so distressing that if I don't do it, I'm not ever going to get relief. And so.
Yeah.
So the second half, the action part of it, that's really a coping mechanism that they're using to, I guess, eliminate stress or anxiety.
Right. But what we find is that when they are doing these, it's temporarily relieving the stress or anxiety, but it's not permanently getting rid of it, because what they'll find is that obsession comes back, and for everyone, it's differing time frames, right? So, there might be someone that is constantly bombarded all the time. And so most of their day is spent, they have the obsessions and they're doing the compulsions. So they get nothing done during the day. That's a very, very severe case.
Yeah.
Versus, someone that has a morning routine that has to be done, that alleviates my stress for the day until I run into a trigger or something that happens that causes that to flare back up. And then I have to go through my steps again.
Okay.
And so, yes, in their mind, I have to do this to relieve the anxiety, but that's the yucky part of the disease, right? Because it never really eliminates it.
So are there different types of OCD, or are different manifestations of that?
So there's several subtypes. So the most common that like you might see that portrayed on TV shows or movies or things like that is contamination or germs, right? The person who is afraid, if I touch this or that, or if I sit here, or if I do, I'm going to get sick. I'm going to get somebody else sick. We had the compulsion to wash and to clean and to do. So there's contamination. Also in that is disgust OCD. So those people just don't want to be dirty. They can't really tell you, this is my thought, this is my obsession. They're just like, I just don't like it, So, but that is a form of OCD because they have certain things that they're doing that are eliminating relieving the anxiety that they feel. So contamination, germs, there's what we call scrupulosity.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
It is. And this one I feel like is the hardest one because a lot of times people with scrupulosity are afraid. It's more of the mental compulsions. They're afraid that they're offending God. They're afraid that they're going to commit blasphemy, that somehow they're doing morality plays a part in that. And so they're doing, they might obsessively be quoting or compulsively be quoting scripture or prayer. And it's not a part of their Christian faith. It's, I've got to do this because I might offend God. Right. And so there's that. There's also another subtype is the harmful, intrusive thoughts. So people, I can't be around a knife because I'm afraid that I'm going to hurt myself, or I can't get rid of the knives because I might hurt someone else. So they have these thoughts that are constantly plaguing them, that they're going to harm someone. Counting and checking is another subtype. So I've worked with clients who can't go out a different door that they came in. They have to retrace. So if I came in this door, I've got to go back out this door. If I did this routine, then I've got to redo it on the back. So a lot, so you can imagine they're spending all their time walking, to make sure it's right.
Yeah. It would feel like, you're like enslaved almost, like, you're just trapped in this and I could just feel, again, the word freedom comes out. Like you don't have the freedom like a normal person, is able to just to go about your day. You feel like you have to do all these things to be okay.
Because I think that's the difference, right? Because we all have these thoughts, these unwanted thoughts that come in our mind. But the difference is we have them and we move on. We move on about our day. They don't stop us. They don't cause us pause. We just kind of like, whatever, and we move on. Right. And so with someone with OCD, they can't move on, and they have to do this compulsion in order to feel better.
Right.
But it's temporary.
So are all baseball players have a mild form of OCD with all their superstitions before they play a game? I don't know.
That's
you hear a lot of baseball players like,
I've got to
do this. I've got to do exactly this. So, I got to do this with my, all these things. So maybe there's some borderline type things or something in there.
I would wonder, does that translate outside the field, right? Are they
so
doing that way?
Be contained. That's true.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's kind of in a bubble
of
things.
So truly it's going to affect all areas of life if you have, Gotcha. Interesting. No, that's, the way you're describing it, I'm hearing some types of OCD, you get temporary relief if you do your kind of routine. But of course, it doesn't fully alleviate. It comes right back again. But then when you described the scrupulosity, I got that right. Awesome.
You did.
Like a lot of syllables. If you do that, it almost feels like it's even hard to find temporary relief, because you just feel like you're being attacked by these thoughts all the time. And so I imagine obviously there's probably a host of different ways that you treat different types of OCD. And so I'd love to kind of hear, what do you do to treat these? Because it's not just, it's just in this one little box and bam, there you go. Okay. What are some of the ways that you treat OCD, I guess?
Kind of what they call the gold standard of care in the OCD world as far as treatment goes, is cognitive behavioral therapy. And kind of a subset of cognitive behavioral therapy is what they call exposure response prevention. It's a mouthful. I have to say it very slowly.
There'll be a test after this. So,
because all my syllables get. So ERP for short.
Okay.
And so ERP, sometimes coupled with medication, an SSRI, can help. Not all clients and patients that deal with OCD need the medicine help. It's just that's kind of an individual decision between their doctor and them, and the counselor they're working with. It's kind of collaborative and they decide. But kind of the gold standard of treatment is ERP, exposure response prevention, and that's a subset of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is pretty common, I think, out there. So, yeah. So what happens with ERP is what we do is we create kind of what we call a fear hierarchy. So I work with a client and I say, okay, based on you wanting to, feeling unclean, like you're going to get sick. Let's talk about all the things that, how being able to go to a public restroom, being able to, like what kind of anxieties does that cause you? And they give me a from 1 to 10, they tell me, oh, that's a 10, being able to share a seat with, someone that you don't know, or a family member or something like that, like anything. And so we start making our list. And so the exposure part, this is kind of how I explains exposure to kids. I'm like, if you've ever watched a scary movie, I was like, have you ever seen a scary movie? And they're like, yeah. And I said, the first time you watched it was really scary, wasn't it? And they were like, yeah. And I was like, but say I told you to watch it 15 more times. Would it be scary? And they're like, no. And I was like, exactly. You start knowing, oh, right there, that music,
right.
It's not. And so then it becomes not scary anymore. So that's exactly what exposures do.
Interesting.
Is we put ourselves in a situation that causes us anxiety based on our list. Okay. And I don't start with 10, right? I start somewhere with a 4.
Like a 3 or 4, yeah.
Right. Okay. A 3 or 4 to have some success. And then we do exposures, and exposures should be done daily. And typically, because I work with kids, I bring the parent in, and the parent is a part of this process. The parent helps create the list. The parent understands what the exposures are. So, for instance, I worked with someone who was afraid of needles. And that was one, he was having a hard time. And I do exposure with all types of anxieties and phobias as well. But to kind of give you so first of all, on his list was talking about getting a shot. That was on his list. So every day I would have mom or dad talk about getting a shot. Like, right? Next it was get a syringe from Amazon, that doesn't have a needle on it. And just now it sits with you at the dinner table. How much anxiety does that, and so he's systematically like,
wow.
And so he got all the way to mom could put alcohol on his arm, like all the things that you would do about to get a shot. And so, and that's kind of what we do. So we just kind of work our way up. So we have success with it. We go to I'm like, are you ready for the next one? And then we talk about that.
Wow. Wow. That's interesting. I even think about my, I've got 7-year-old, and he likes to go to Rainforest Cafe. Mm-hmm. But, when we first would start going, you have all the animatronics, like the gorilla. And at first, it totally freaked him out.
Oh, yeah.
But now when we go, immediately, he's like, those are fake. That's not real. That's fake. Those are fake. He's kind of like
he's talking
exposed
to himself, right?
And now he's like, I know they're not real, and I'm scared right now, but that's a fake. That's not real.
Yeah.
So it almost reminds me a little bit of like, getting more exposure. Now he's totally fine.
Right. He can go and sit and knows that. Right. Versus his first time.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of very, I guess, the best way I can kind of explain ERP to you. And I think I've had such great success with it, and it is the gold standard for treatment. You look on anybody's literature, anybody that's kind of in the field of OCD right now, and they're talking about ERP. That's that's kind of what they use to treat their clients as well.
Yeah.
So
that's awesome.
And I love it because you can be creative. So because I'm like, so what about if and they're like, oh. So we really get creative with, because I want them to think about every way, how can I expose myself to this,
Yeah, that's right. And it sounds like that is even something that maybe if you have a child with phobias or maybe not a super severe case of OCD, but even a parent could similarly use that type of strategy to kind of help their kids get over fears or different things too. So that is awesome. Well, kind of a follow-up to that too, what would you say, what are some resources available for someone impacted by OCD, or if you have a family member, what would you say?
There are a lot of great things out there. First of all, the International OCD Foundation is not just for mental health professionals. That is also designed for families, for people that are impacted by OCD. They have a ton of resources. They have a ton of now everything's virtual. They have a ton of webinars and things like that people can watch. Their conference this year, and their conference has always been, it's for people impacted by OCD. It's for family members that have someone impacted by OCD, and it's for professionals who work with individuals with OCD. So it's kind of a threefold things, which is kind of cool. And this year it's all online. You can literally sit from the comfort of your home, and you can decide what sessions that you want to attend and things like that. So that's a great resource because you have the leading people in the field of OCD talking and kind of providing, their insight and information and things like that. So that's also great. Also, if you are needing to find someone to help, right? They have a resource that you can find a therapist that they've kind of vetted in a sense of, for instance, I've done their behavioral therapy institute, where I did an intensive for a weekend on pediatric OCD, and then I followed up with consultation calls with one of the professors of that weekend that we continued to do case consultation. And so so I've been through all that. So they know, so I'm a part of that resource, right? That you can find someone in your area, but it's for anyone, anywhere, in any, so that's the great thing. Also, another great resource here in Houston that kind of started here in Houston is the Peace of Mind Foundation. It's a nonprofit. Again, it is solely for the education and the advocacy of people with OCD or family members that have members that are struggling with OCD. So there is a lot of great resources out there that just the click, we're all on all on the internet or on our phones or iPads or anything. And so it's right there for people to be able to access. So
that's awesome. That's, you mentioned too, again, the one with the big words, scrupulosity or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah. And so with that one, is there a different type of treatment or resource that's helpful? Again, if it's more in your thoughts and all that, like how you really deal with that.
So typically someone with I won't say typically because I don't want to generalize it, but in my work with it, I'll say, those people will refrain from watching any TV. For fear they might see something that will cause them to have to confess or, ask for forgiveness, things like that. So they have trouble driving even down the highway because what if I see a billboard that then, right? And so so a lot of those exposures are aimed at exposing myself to those things too, and then helping to reframe some of the mental compulsions that I'm doing.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. So it still works with that type of OCD as well.
It's just a little bit harder. You work a little bit harder.
Okay.
Both client and clinician have to work a little bit harder to kind of really make sure that we're getting exactly, because I have trouble saying to someone, don't pray. Then just don't pray. Right. Because I'm a person of faith. So I'm like, that's kind of my lifeline too. So but I also want to tease out what's OCD and what's your walk. Like your,
distinguishing those.
Right. And helping them to kind of break that out.
Yeah.
That those are two different things.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Well, Joy, we're so thankful for people like you that just invest so much into understanding the different components, because part of our desire for Equip is to bring these different topics into light so that there's a sense of normalcy in the conversation about it, and even a sense of a resource to be able to get help.
Yeah.
So as part of while you're talking, I was thinking about my son when he was 3 years old. It wasn't OCD, but he had this recurring nightmare. And so we took him to a counselor, and she was just able to ask him a few questions that helped him get over that. And after that session, next time that thing confronted him in a nightmare, he was able to deal with it, and it didn't create that anymore. So we were just so thankful for people like yourself who invest in that. And so one of the questions that we would have as a follow-up would be, what are the levels of intervention that someone with OCD can seek?
So there are several levels, and it's really dependent upon how severe, how debilitating the OCD is for that particular person. So typically everyone starts out most normally going to a therapist, going to a counselor for their OCD. But if and I've had these in my practice before, if they require more intensive work, I don't have that in my schedule to be able to see someone 2 or 3 or 4 times a week. So there's a great Mclean Ocd Institute here in Houston that they can go, and they do intensive outpatient, meaning the person would go 2 or 3, 4 times a week. They do a partial hospitalization. They do inpatient if you need to go, just to be monitored. And so there's all levels of care for someone. And we live in a great community in Houston that has all those things right here. And so that's where we start. And I think that's just kind of working with a counselor and kind of them really understanding what's going on and is it beyond the scope of what I'm able to do. That's when you would talk about other levels.
So really the counselor is kind of your gatekeeper to help you know at what level that you need if you're struggling with it. If your child, I mean, we're talking about all ages here, but we're really focusing on children. If your child's struggling with that.
Yes. Yeah. And so that's the first and foremost thing that I kind of look at, like how, and there are assessments that we can do that are free online that I typically do with kids and adolescents and even adults that I work with OCD to kind of give me an idea of how intense and how these obsessions that you're having, how many times a day, hours. We kind of go through this questionnaire and then we talk about their compulsions and how much in a day are you doing these rituals and things like that. And so it gives me a really good understanding of, okay, do I have, in the time that we're going to have in my office weekly, is that going to be enough to really be able to get some relief? Because that's what you're wanting. You're wanting them to have some relief. Like, it's possible. It is possible to, live with this and, and to be able to have the skill to deal with it.
Right.
So as a parent, I may be suspecting something. I may not be exactly sure what's going on with my child. How do I recognize the onset? Is there an onset? What does that look like for me to say, you know what, it's probably time for us to go to a counselor? Can you help us with that?
Yeah, I think that anything that, so for kids, obviously it's a little bit harder because they can't articulate really. Right. The words necessarily are they're developmentally, their brains haven't developed in a way to be able to even articulate what they're thinking, right? Having thoughts about what you're thinking kind of thing. So, so for a parent, I just think that how are they, with change in routine? Are they able to adapt and be flexible pretty quickly? Or is it something that they freeze and they don't have the inability to move forward? And I think so for instance, they are having a hard time separating, whether it be school or for soccer practice or, things like that. Like it's like this is starting to impact us as a family. Right. And so I think that's probably the biggest indicator for families when they feel like, okay, this is just kind of beyond a worry or something like that we can deal with. We need some kind of outside help. Because as parents, being one too, you're just so emotionally connected. Right. And so hard to be objective, to step outside to go kind of what's really going on here. And so that's what's great about having kind of a third party, being able to kind of see. With OCD, and something I didn't even bring up is, so when you start work, especially with kids, because that's typically what I work with, especially with kids, you really start to see as they're talking about the things that they're thinking about, their obsessions and what I have to do. And typically we start with, what are you doing first? And then why do you think you're washing your hands?
Yeah.
10
start
times
with the action or the compulsion part.
So then it kind of, I might get sick, Right. So as you're working with kids, you start to see, how is the parent accommodating the OCD? And parents don't realize that they are a part of it, not even unbeknownst to them, not realizing that, so if a child needs reassurance and they're constantly needing reassurance and they're constantly needing, and the parent's giving, oh, you're fine. You're not sick. You're okay. Right. That's continuing the OCD cycle. Right. Okay. And so also I'm having to work with parents to go, okay, how are you inadvertently, like this is no fault of yours, but how is it that we get you to kind of pull back your, the accommodation so that you're not inadvertently kind of keeping this going. Yeah. And so kids don't like that a whole lot because a lot of times they rely on that parent to make me feel better.
Right. And you have
your
to
presence makes me feel better, or your words help me feel better. And I have to go, oh, no,
you have to wean them off that a little bit. Yeah.
Yes.
And then it's okay. You're going to be fine without hearing this 100 times a day. You're going to be okay.
You're going to be okay. Yeah.
Hmm.
And so that's another kind of layer to it as well in treating OCD is really, now as adults, that's different. Obviously, you don't need, someone else, and they can pretty much can articulate it and know. And they can even say, well, I do this. I call this person, or I talk to this person, they can kind of identify where their accommodation comes from. But kids have a harder time, because as soon as I start talking about that, the kid knows, oh gosh, she's going to take my security blanket.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, and we do that systematically. Don't yank it from them, but so if you've asked mom 10 times a day, I'm just going to tell mom to answer you 8. Right. And so we kind of work. So we're all working together to figure out what's going to work the best.
Seems like that family component, right?
It is. It's huge. And that's what we do in our practice anyway. We're huge collaboration. Yeah. We don't want to see a kid in isolation. We want the family to be a part of it. And with OCD, it's so important because there's so many things happening. And like I said, the kid developmentally is not at a place that they can really understand like what is happening in my brain and why is it, doing that and why am I doing this? And so it's really helpful to have that parent who lives it every day with them in there to kind of help with the process.
Well, good stuff.
Yeah. No, we really appreciate it. It's, again, I love just creating this format that we can talk about things that are out there that are, but we really have a lot of confusion and giving parents guidance too. I think, even your idea about, even if it's just, do a little assessment, and because I think sometimes even in the counseling world, sometimes I think parents are resistant for a lot of reasons, but even one of them might be the financial side of it.
Right.
They're just like, well, we can't afford it and all that. But even just to do a free assessment can at least give you a little bit of an idea on, okay, really low, we're almost in the normal level, but we can learn some things to help a little bit here. Or, okay, no, we really do have something that they would benefit from getting some counsel and some help.
Yeah.
So I think it's a great word. And again, for parents, that we're obviously the ones that are observing these things, especially for the younger kids that don't have the ability to articulate it.
Right.
Yeah. So, well, hey, we're going to go ahead and kind of wrap up a little bit here. But Joy, if this has been such a great conversation, and I know that, again, the purpose of these conversations is we're not going to exhaustively capture everything in a short conversation, but if people are watching, they're like, you know what, I'd love to really, talked about some of the resources, and we'll list those, but what's the best way if somebody wanted to learn more, connect with you? Okay. What would be the best way for them to do that?
Well, the best way to connect with me is through our website, www.connectps.org.
Okay.
They can also call our main number. It's 832-534-3993, and they can speak with the admin, and she can give them all the information needed that they needed to know. But that's awesome. Those are the two probably easiest and quickest ways to connect with me for sure.
Perfect. And just like in a last minute here, is there a recap? Is there something that we didn't get to that you definitely want to throw in there? But is there maybe a final challenge, anything that you'd want as we wrap up for us to think about?
Reemphasize.
I would just say that the one thing that I love about working with OCD is the ability just to, we might do something and it's like, that didn't really, we have the opportunity to kind of shift. And okay, we tried that exposure, that really didn't do anything. Let's do something else. So it's not like this is the way you do it, and this is the only way you do it, and if you don't do it this way, then it won't work. No, there's just so much room for creativity and thinking outside the box. And I use exposures a lot. I work with a lot of anxiety, like a lot. Yeah. That's a big part of my practice right now. And anytime I can use exposures, I try to, because I think they're ways just to understand anxiety and just putting ourselves in that thing that causes anxiety helps us to relieve it. And
That's
so,
awesome.
yeah. And it kind of, at first parents are like, you're going to do what? You're going to make them anxious? And I'm like, but it's good. It does sound counterintuitive, but it works.
Right.
It really works.
Really brings freedom. I mean, I can just see it setting people free.
Yeah.
And so what I'm hearing you say, too, that I think is important in all of these discussions that we look at is it's a process.
It's a process.
It's not one thing, okay, if you'll just do this and tomorrow
There's
it all
no
goes
magic
away.
formula.
Yeah.
No magic thing, no magic.
Right.
Yeah. And I would say, it's a process. It's a process of being with the right fit, with the right counselor, all those things. And I know that sometimes I'm not the right fit for people, and that's okay, because there's a lot of people out there that can be and that will be. So
absolutely. That's awesome. Well, hey, we want to thank all of you for joining us today. And again, just been a great conversation to have. And the Equip Online series is a partnership between StoneBridge Church and Mosaics of Mercy. Mosaics of Mercy is a nonprofit here in Montgomery County, and their desire is to be a mental resource hub. And so if a next step maybe for you is to investigate what are some resources out there, or what are some support groups, Mosaics of Mercy is a great place to go and check out their website. So we'll have information about them and then other helpful resources on our Equip Online website. Encourage you to check that out. But as always, our desire is that you would walk in the fullness of life that you've been created for. God bless you. Hey, thanks so much for watching. We're really passionate about shedding light on mental health. If you found this discussion helpful or beneficial, be sure to like and share the video. If you want to see more, be sure to subscribe and don't forget to ding that notification bell so you know when we release a new episode. We'll see you next time.